Welcome, everybody. I'm Rebecca, and this is The Good Book Club. This is our April meeting. It's the 16th. It's Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and we are absolutely thrilled to have everybody here. We are going to start out, as we always do, by reading our mission statement, and we've asked our book club member, Nelson, if he would read that for us.
Okay, the Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies.
Oh, thank you so much, Nelson. We read that at the beginning of each of our programs just to make sure that number one, we remember what we're all about, and also for people that are new to kind of give them a sense of what our perspectives and our mission statement is all about. So we also talk about fun things we did in the past. A lot of Good Book Club members went to Wise Guys Comedy Club, and we saw Fresh King Benjamin, who is a former polygamist comedian, which is funny in itself. So that was really fun. So we appreciate all of you that came out with us to that, because that was a really awesome evening. We love to meet we call it book club members in the wild, those that are in Utah and like to join us for things. So that was really fun. So thanks everybody for that. And we have something really exciting coming up that we are going to let Landon, who is kind of spearheading this, talk about.
Yeah, so anyone who missed Tuesday, we had a lazy learner discussion of the cultural astronomy of the ancient Fremont with Dr. John Lundwall, who's one of our members. And those that made it, it was such a great talk. Everyone got all excited about wanting to see some of this Indian rock art. So we went ahead and we scheduled a field trip. So we're going to go to Fremont Indian State Park. It's down there off I-70. It's about 2 hours, a little bit, 2 hours, 30 minutes to the site. So what we're going to do, we'll meet in Orem, and then we can drive down together, carpool if people want to carpool. And we're going to do that on May 6th and 7th. We'll go down, we'll spend the day, and Dr. Lundwall will show us some of the rock art. It's really interesting, the stuff he has. And then we'll go over and stay the night in Richfield, or you can come back. It's up to you. We're going to stay the night in Richfield and then head up into Emery County and see a couple other panels that he had shown us that were really interesting, and then drive back Sunday night, and we can pick back up the cars if you want to leave it at the Orem track station. So we'll put more information out. If you're interested, please let us know, and we'll start a chat, and we'll put out all the information for the information that you need to do that. So everyone's welcome, and hope you can make it.
Yeah, this is going to be really exciting, really wonderful. I hope you guys can participate if you're around. So, all right, very quickly, our upcoming events that we have. I also help John DeLynn run his Mormon Stories book club, and we are reading Conspiracy by Michael Shermer. So this is extra bonus reading for us in the Good Book Club. We are going to be having a live stream with Michael and I need to update that date. I'm sorry, Melissa, I didn't let you know. We had to change it, some conflict with John. It's actually going to be May 19th. So you have a long time to read the book, and we're going to be able to talk and ask questions to Michael Shermer. So this is going to be really exciting. So we'll get those dates updated online for you, but it is not until May. And another bonus event, bonus reading, the amazing Lorelei Kay, From Mormon to Mermaid, One Woman's Joy from Voyage from Oppression to Freedom. She is just a fabulous person. We just interviewed her over on Mormonish, and she's going to come and talk to us on a bonus event on Tuesday evening, May 2nd at 7 p.m. And she'll be reading some of her work, and we can talk to her. And it's such a quick read. It's just such a really interesting, fun book. I would highly recommend everybody grab this, and we'll talk to Lorelei beginning of May. So, and then next on the radar for book club, I am very excited about this one. We're just briefly going to mention it here. Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. And Bruce is our discussion leader for this. This is going to be May 21st, same time, 11 a.m. And Bruce is going to give us more details at the end of book club today about Genghis Khan, but put that in your Amazon cart. And of course, date change. Typically our meetings are the second Sunday of the month, but of course, Mother's Day, we can't have a lot of kids and dads and moms mad at us because we're taking time away for book club. So we have moved that to May 21st. So you have some time to read Genghis Khan. So be aware of that date change. Whew, I think we made it through all the announcements. And now on to the main event, what everybody is here for. This incredible, pivotal, foundational book in the post-Mormon world. We are going to be discussing Recovering Agency by Luna Corbden today. And the author, Luna, is here with us. We could not be more thrilled. We're actually pinching ourselves that Luna is here. So from this point, we are going to let our discussion leader, Sean, kind of take it from here. He is going to introduce Luna, read Luna's bio, and then kind of take the discussion from there. So thank you, everybody, and take it away, Sean.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome, Luna. We haven't actually met yet, but it's wonderful to have you join us. We're so excited. And I am definitely not the most interested. Oh, hi, there you are. Okay, I see you now.
Thanks.
So I am definitely not the most interesting person in this room, as you will find out here quickly. This is just a quick bio. Luna Corbden was born into the LDS Church and left the faith in 2001 at age 26. They are autistic and gender fluid, live in Washington State, and write about topics of interest, including psychology, mind control, culture, and autism. Their book, Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control, helps religious trauma survivors unpack their conditioning by deconstructing the manipulation techniques used by the LDS Church. They are an advocate for marginalized people who exist within or at the fringes of authoritarian religions, particularly Mormonism. And Corbden also writes science fiction and fantasy. When they're not busy traveling to improbable worlds or thinking hard about this improbable world, they're probably snuggled with their cat and an iPad. More about Corbden's work can be found at www.recoveringagency.com, and they can be reached on Mastodon at Corbden at defcon.social. So, Luna, now that we've got you here, we thought maybe we could give you just a couple minutes to say anything you want before the presentation, or introduce yourself, or say anything you want about the book before we get into the discussion.
Great. I don't really have a whole lot to say. I'm here to answer questions, and once you get me started on a topic, I can usually go, but I'm a little bit prompt dependent, which is an autism thing. If there's not something reminding me of a thing, then I don't always have much to say. So thank you very much for that intro.
Fantastic. Well, we're excited to have you here for some Q&A, and I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So I'll try and explain how this is going to work for the Q&A portion and discussion portion. There is so much to this book. It is so meaty that we could literally take hours and hours and hours discussing all the particulars of the book. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a little bit fast in my presentation to save a little bit of time for some discussion. But I've titled this presentation, of course, we have the title of the book, Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control. But I've also given this a personal title, Plus One Active Member's Personal Journey, because reading this book, and I agreed to read this book and take this on many, many months ago before I had any idea what it was going to do to me. But I did interject, and you'll see in the presentation highlighted in blue some of my thoughts and my experience as we go along, and the impact that the book had on me. So we'll start with a quick bio. And like I said, I am not the most interesting person in this room, but I thought it might be good for you to kind of know where I'm coming from. I was very TBM my whole life, fourth generation member. I'm the youngest of 8. Come from a very dysfunctional family. And the church was a huge, huge anchor in my life as a youth growing up, which I'm very, very grateful for in many ways. In 1988, I was among the first 2 elders to open Poland up to missionary work. My mission journal has also been copied into the church archives. I was recently serving as bishop here in Southern Michigan, released about 4 years ago, and I'm currently serving on the High Council. The November 2015 policy of exclusion basically drove my faith crisis. And my shelf broke in 2020 while serving on the High Council. The only people who are really aware of this right now are my bishop, outside of my family, are my bishop and my stake president, who has, for some reason, decided that it's still a good thing for me to serve on the High Council. After this experience on the Good Book Club in this presentation, that may change. We'll see. This is probably the bravest thing I've ever done in the world of post-Mormonism. I have a very, very happy marriage, 6 children. My oldest is non-binary. I also have 3 boys and 2 girls. My wife and 3 of my boys are still very much in the church. And right now, I'm just spending my time throughout my deconstruction process looking for ways that I can bridge gaps between TBMs, PMOs, and XMOs. And I would classify myself as very, very, very nuanced member, maybe drifting towards the PMO category. As you can see, I really like colors, and this is going to be the outline of our presentation and discussion. We'll have 3 segments. We'll start with segment 1, where we will basically cover all of part 1 and part 2 of the book. And then we will get into a little bit of part 3, thought reform methods. After spending about 20 minutes or so in that, we'll have some discussion and some Q&A. You're all free to say what you want to say, or ask me, or ask especially Luna any questions that you might have on the content, and I will put up a summary of the topics that are covered in that section. Segment 2 will cover the bulk of part 3, the thought reform methods, and then the segment 3 will finish off part 3 and then have the conclusion with some final discussion time and final Q&A. So with that, part 1, forward. I put in a few quotes from Luna that I absolutely loved, and this is one that I felt had a very good way to set the tone for the entire book. The degree to which controlling tactics are used is what separates the freest groups from the most coercive. The LDS Church falls someplace on the unethical end of the spectrum, but it doesn't have to. Mormonism can still retain its unique identity as a religion without using coercive persuasion methods. I love that quote because it does give some hope for improvement for the church, which I would love to see. So in the first section, part 1, in the beginning, it started in a garden. Luna does a wonderful job, and the book covers the subject of Adam and Eve as heroes, which is a unique teaching in the church. Many Christian churches teach just the opposite. But I give credit to the founders of the church for this particular theology. Free will versus determinism, an unanswerable question. And basically, the book helps to kind of explore the gray areas between, what does free agency look like, and what does determinism look like, and how might a church take advantage and overuse controlling techniques. Here's this section that I had the most difficult time with, was the C word. And I went into this book thinking, is it a church or is it a cult? And then I started wondering, is there really a difference? I suppose it could be argued that every religion that exists in the world started out in some way as a cult. There may be characteristics of every religion that has some culty characteristics to it. But my personal struggle was, would I ever call the LDS Church a cult? After reading the book, I had to concede that the church is very, very much culty. It is very definitely culty in its nature, and it doesn't have to be. But that, yeah, I couldn't disagree with so much of what was presented in the book. Luna then presents their exit story, which I felt was really a wonderful, scientific, honest, self-reflective looking at the evidence. And I think that's something that I could definitely relate to, being kind of scientific in my own mind as well. And then the illusion of choice. This is the part that really got to me. You have a choice. You can pick one. You can pick the church or you can pick death. There's your choice. Not much of a choice. So that was very eye-opening for me. What is mind control? If you were brainwashed, would you know it? Do Mormons recognize other cults? I think that they do. Here's a quote from Margaret Singer from Cults in Our Midst. Thought reform is a concerted effort to change a person's way of looking at the world, which will change his or her behavior. And then this point I thought was very important. Informed consent or lack thereof is a major factor in determining, you know, how much mind control is going on within an organization. Then the question is, what is a cult? A cult could be defined as excessive devotion, uses thought reform, induces psychological dependency, exploits members, and causes psychological harm. And after looking at all that, I thought, yeah, my personal confession again, that the church is definitely very, very, very culty in its nature. Here's some myths of cults and mind control that were covered in Luna's book. Cults, myths, well, there's several. Cults are weird or obvious. Not so. Brainwashing involves physical restraint, hypnotic wheels, flashing images. Brainwashing requires hypnosis. Only stupid, needy, mentally ill, uneducated, or spiritually weak people join cults. All cults are religious in nature. A cult is any pseudo-Christian or non-Christian faith. Cult means the same thing as occult, which is definitely not true. People can easily leave a cult whenever they want. No one is forcing them to be there. People who have left cults should get over it. Brainwashing is total. Leaving or disagreeing is proof that they were not brainwashed. So those are all, I thought, really eye-opening myths, and I've had these myths myself when I've thought of cults in the past. But the more I've learned about cults, and I've studied a lot of books lately, and certainly this one helps to shed light on the fact that it's not so simple, that there's a lot more to being involved that makes it difficult to even recognize that you're in a cult. All is not well in Zion. Happiness and Plato's allegory of the cave was presented. Then the question, is Mormonism a danger to society? You know, it's this nice little religion and people are really kind and trying to do their best. How much of a danger is it? But I think that there are some really good points made in the book that they're actually, yeah, you can drift too far. You can go too far, and there are organizations who have done so, which we certainly wouldn't want to see the LDS Church drift into an area where they're actually causing harm. And in many ways, they are causing harm. I think we all know that. All of us who are on this meeting know that that there's some real harm that's taking place. It impacts the church impacts the way we look at life. It does cause damage, and it changes how we make decisions throughout our lives. It affects our self-esteem. Sometimes we can feel like a square peg in a round hole and just not fitting in. The guilt and shame, depression, eating disorders, and suicide, I think we see that rampant among members of the church. Codependency, passive-aggressive culture, which is something that I'm trying to unprogram myself from. And I've spent several years of therapy to work on just that. And then material loss, tithing, focusing so much on the next life that you basically sacrifice this life, and so forth. So yeah, these are all good reasons to be aware of why there's problems in Zion. Don't just get over it, recover. Though hard to you, this journey may appear, it covers, there's real challenges leaving. We have to reprogram ourselves. We have to learn how to live in society again, and how to do things that maybe we were trained poorly how to handle in our time in the church. Those who are born in the covenant experience unique challenges compared to those who were converts to the church. And then, but the point here in this section was that thriving is possible. And we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation as well. Luna discusses slippery sources. And we have to be mindful of the sources that we're told to stick to. And also there are sources out there that are very educational and can help really shed light. Truth is eternal and verifiable. Truth is eternal, depends on who you ask. Even within the church, you can get different answers from different people, and it's very, very slippery. There is good by their fruits. There is good that does exist, and I think Luna does a good job of pointing that out. Obviously, that it's not all bad. There is some good, and I think it's good to acknowledge that. So those were the main sections of part 1. And then in part 2, we get into the science of believing. In the science of believing, we cover a theory of cognitive dissonance by Leon Festinger, and he states 3 strategies for reducing dissonance. One is altering cognitions, like existing cognitions, you might change your belief. Adding new cognitions or rejecting the new information is one way to reduce dissonance. And that might include new cognitions, mental, or it might be behavioral. You might behave differently, or social. Alter importance of cognitions and prioritize what is essential. So something may, you may bring a concern to a leader of the church, say, hey, this new information is really, really bothering me. And then the altering the importance might sound something like, well, that's not really critical to your salvation. In other words, don't worry about it. Well, there's a lot of that going on right now, and a lot of things that we're just not supposed to worry about. They're all stacking up on a shelf. Luna discusses 5 fictional case studies. One was Sister Brooks, who had no support for, offered no support for a sister who was being abused. Brother Pell, trying to reconcile evolution with creation. Sister Warren, rejecting unpleasant facts of Joseph Smith. Elder Roberts, a missionary, dealing with contradictions of the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And then Brother Porter, resigning from the church due to deceptions. These obviously were fictional case studies, but I think all of us could probably relate to these case studies, that these things are happening. These situations and circumstances happen all the time, and we could probably add quite a few more to that list. Just one from our general conference last week, which was or 2 weeks ago, which was very eye-opening, comes from Elder Haney. And here's his quote. Unlike vintage comic books and classic cars, prophetic teachings do not become more valuable with age. That is why we should not seek to use the words of past prophets to dismiss the teachings of living prophets. So I think that was a perfect example of readjusting priorities in our minds to deal with the dissonance that happens when we discover new information. What is the antidote? Cognitive awareness. And this was, I think, the tipping point for me in my journey is when I finally started asking myself the question, what if I'm wrong? What else did they get wrong? As soon as I allowed myself to even entertain that question, then the floodgates started opening. And I think that was really, really key and really, really insightful. Luna addresses prophecy failures and the mental gymnastics that everyone jumps through to try and make the prophetic thing valid again. There's a couple of quotes that they make in the book regarding biases and confirmation bias. So the bias blind spot is the king of all biases. Other people are suckers, but not you. And that is an illusion. You're a sucker too. We all are. How true is that? And then another quote, you pray for sun and 9 times it's raining, but the 10th time the sun came out and you thank God. Brilliant. Also under the science of believing, there's influence. Let's see, Robert, I think it's Cialdini with the influence, science, and practice. He talks about 6 compliance practices, which are reciprocation or obligation to give back, feeling obligated. Second one was commitment and consistency. And I kind of call it in for a penny, in for a pound mentality, that we all want to be, we don't want to look bad. So if we're going to dedicate so much of our lives towards some belief system, for goodness sakes, it can't be false. Then there's social proof. You do as you see, monkey do. Liking, which is the halo effect. That person's just so amazing, so they can't be wrong. Obedience to authority, which is very prevalent everywhere, and then scarcity. The motivating threat behind loss. And I think we see evidence of all of this. Luna talks about mirror neurons and the twisting. We're all programmed to have empathy, and sometimes that empathy can be twisted in a way that can affect the way that we think. And then they talked about the Milgram experiment of those who were just following orders when they were electrocuting people in the other room because they were told to do that. A lot of great stuff in this book, and I wish we could spend a lot more time diving into all of these, but I'm going to go through quickly the first 4 of the thought reform methods, and then we're going to open it up for discussion because we covered a lot already, and I want to give everyone a chance to kind of weigh in on any of your thoughts that you have. So in part 3, Luna talks about the whole armor of God, that it is a perpetual motion machine, and the machine is you. You are the machine. That we're the ones who are in perpetual motion. We're the ones who are hustling for worthiness and acceptance. And we're all paying the price for the good. We talked about how much good there is, right? But unfortunately, we don't always count the cost of the bad that comes along with it. Characteristics of thought reform include controlling time, powerlessness under authority, closed system of logic, subtle and unsophistication. And, I look at it as some people just have a very simple faith. I don't know that this is necessarily shallow-minded. I put that in there as a question. But I think some people do have a very simple faith, and they don't want to be bothered by all the complex stuff. And maybe it works for them if they don't have to, kind of come out of their shell. But those who are maybe more thoughtful and think a lot more deeply, it might be more of a struggle for them to try and make connections and make sense of everything. Eroding perceptions, manipulating experiences with rewards and punishments, etc. And then, of course, the bite model. Brad Morin, an ex-Mormon, says, a quote here, "It is not ignorance which damns us, rather it is the love of ignorance, the devotion of ignorance, the passionate embrace of ignorance. By labeling other views as evil, they relentlessly insist, see no evil, hear no evil." And each method that we're going to go over performs several of the following functions. It provides rewards, suppression, influence, trust, reinforcement, punishment, silencing doubts, group identification, isolation, and perpetuation. So here's the first two. Love bombing. Of course, love bombing, we're all familiar with that. Friendliness, flattery, praise, affection freely used. Often targeting visitors, less actives, or those who are struggling. And, you know, part of me thinks, is this genuine, natural? I think it is. I think people are genuinely nice, but I think that maybe the way that we target certain people may be a little bit fabricated. And there's not the same intensity given to regular members, you know, regular in quotes, as might be given to those who are in these special circumstances. So does that mean it's maybe not so genuine? I think that's a good question. Destabilization. We're supposed to put ourselves on the shelf. We're targeting unstable individuals, born in the covenant, and then regaining the self, following our own true north, are all aspects of overcoming destabilization. Deception is the third one. And I think this is the one that really bothered me the most as I got looking into all of the specific examples. There's omissions, obfuscations, front activities, and lies. We've all heard the term lying for the Lord. Covering up inconsistencies, flaws, unusual aspects of practices, doctrine, leadership, history. I've heard it described perfectly here. Lawyers, it's like a lawyer refusing to release evidence that would basically shed light on all of the truth. But the lawyer has an agenda. The lawyer is trying to win that side of the argument and therefore snuff out any dissenting opinions or thoughts. We've heard of milk before meat. Some teachings are revealed only when the member is quote unquote ready. Latest teaching, this wasn't in the book, but latest teachings that I'm aware of, that I've come across along these lines. Now, an 8-year-old baptism removes agency, and it has serious obligation of that individual, especially if it's a male, to serve a mission. Basically, we're being told now by leaders of the church that, well, you were baptized, so what if you were 8? But that covenant you made at the age of 8, you promised that you would do everything. And that includes serving a mission, that includes going through the temple and all the promises that you make there, and basically dedicating your entire life. That's what we're being told now. I think that the church has made some baby steps in the endowment and gospel topics essays to be a little bit more forthcoming on what people are getting into. So I give them credit for that, but they're very, very much baby steps. This was my favorite quote of the whole book. Under sacred science, a closed system of logic. Our post-enlightenment culture requires a pretense of reason for all ideas. The modern mind, even the modern religious mind, demands an explanation. Yet on an intuitive level, we still crave the unexplainable. If a cult leader can successfully wrap the two together in a way that continues to make sense, the opposing concepts can amplify in a feedback loop of euphoric consonance, a spiritual experience for the present day. Such teachings will satiate a craving for answers and seem superior to any other school of thought. I love this because I have that scientific mind. I need to think along the lines of logic. And when you combine the logic with the miracle, then you have a perfect system for people like me to kind of fall right into. And the closed system of logic has 3 key goals. Number 1, the church is universally true and logical, and answers only can be found in the group teachings. Number 2, the prophet speaks for God. And number 3, suppression of dissent. Critics and questioners are immoral. And there you have your mind trap. You achieve those 3, then you're trapped and you're stuck in this closed system of logic. So that's the first segment. And we're going to open it up for some questions or comments, if anybody has any.
Yeah, raise your hand on the
Oh yeah, raise your hand on the Zoom. That way we can call on you. Landon.
Yeah, I wanted to say first off, with Luna being on here, just what a great book this was. I mean, I don't think you missed anything. I was going through there going, wow, she's really hit everything. And it was just so eye-opening to me. You know, I already knew, and we went to Thrive and got to listen to Dr. Hassan, who I know you used in a lot of your book. You referenced his work. And so I really got a whole month full of this mind control, and then to be able to see conference as part of that as well. In fact, Rebecca created a little bingo game that was the bite model bingo, where you could look for these different cult tactics in each of the talks that were given at conference time. So it was really interesting to see the tactics, and I think you just hit everything. I was just blown away as I read it, how accurate these things were and how much it played into my life. And, you know, one of the things is I think we all felt, you know, how was I so dumb that I fell for this so long? But one of the points that you made was that it's really a lot of times it's actually high intelligent people who end up in these cults, and many of us were born into it and never knew anything other than that. But it was interesting to see that a lot of the other cults outside of Mormonism that we see also have very highly intelligent people who are buying into these tactics. So the tactics work, and you look, they don't just work on a religious level, but you kept mentioning China and how China would use these, and I've seen that like North Korea and other places where they use these tactics. And how, you know, really about half the world is probably under mind control of some sort from a government or religion. And so it was so important to see these different aspects and be able to look at them rationally, to see not only am I being necessarily influenced by the church, but I could be influenced by my government as well. Am I looking at that? Am I looking at other institutions in my life to see if they're using these same tactics, so that we can kind of look and step back and say, I've got to maybe remove myself from this cognitive dissonance and step back and see where is the truth really at. And that was where, for me, this book was really so useful. And so I really appreciate it, Luna. It was really well written.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that. And speaking of feeling dumb, and this is why none of us are dumb for getting wrapped up in this. While I was writing this book, I was about 5-6 years into a relationship with an abuser. And, you know, it's that subconscious niggling, what I'm researching here kind of feels familiar kind of a thing. So even aware of all of these strategies, you can still get caught up in something, and it isn't just governments, and it isn't just religions and other and business groups and things like that. It's also our personal relationships that we need to be really careful of and make sure that we have agency, and that our partners have agency, and that those needs are balanced between people. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Lynette.
Hello. First of all, I just want to thank Luna. This book has been very helpful for us. I know when I first read it, probably 5 years ago or something, there was so much in it. I couldn't take it all in. But since then, I've been able to look at pieces of it and understand more about it. Luna, I just want to ask you, how did you come to write this book and how did you come to leave the church? And you were so young. Here I am. I'm in my 60s now. So I was in my late 50s when things started to click, but you were, what, 20 or something? How did you figure it out so young?
Yeah, I was 26, and I kind of circumvented it. So I didn't go the direct route where I was wading through all of this cognitive dissonance and using all the strategies that the church taught me. Like I said, I'm a science fiction writer sometimes, and I was in a chat group that was talking about this concept of the technological singularity. You can go read about it. There's a lot we see it in science fiction, the Terminator, the Matrix, this idea that someday something will invent something that's more intelligent than us. And I was sort of grappling with the ideas of what that really means and thinking about what intelligence is and what a superior intelligence is and what it's like for us to be superior intelligences to animals, and then what that would be like if we were the ant or the animal, trying to understand something more intelligent than us. And it just clicked all of a sudden that this being that I was describing, it was identical to God, and that the difficulty I was having in comprehending such an artificial intelligence type being would be the exact same difficulty we would have in comprehending God. And I just kind of put two and two together and went, but the church says we should know all these things about God. I mean, they say God is incomprehensible, but then they turn around and like, well, here's all the ways that God is comprehensible. He's a father. He loves us. He punishes us. He wants justice. These are all very human concepts. And I could no longer believe in that human of a God, which kind of left me not believing in any revealed God, any God that any human beings have interpreted, except for those that are vague and very ephemeral. So that's how I left. And then a couple years after I left, a friend of mine, a friend of a friend, kind of was running a little bit of a cult of her own, but I didn't really know anything about cults yet to recognize that. And she recommended, she's like, have you been deprogrammed? And I'm like, no, I'm fine, thanks. But then that really started bugging me. I started thinking about that. And so I picked up a couple books on cults and mind control. Then I picked up some more books and I just started devouring them and writing footnotes. And I knew I wanted to write a book someday about it, but just, I was working in IT, a high-paced tech career, and never got around to it. And then when I got with aforementioned abuser, I was financially dependent on him after a while, which was the downside of that. The upside of that was that I did have time to write this book. And so that's one of those things we all take from our experiences, the good and the bad. And that was the good thing that I got out of that relationship, was the ability to write this book. So that's how it came about. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynette. Bruce.
Yeah, I just have, kind of my general thoughts on why I'm part of the book club and like it so much is because since I left, I'm trying to figure out how the world works, what my place is. And with the book club, we've read Sapiens, Free Will, The Body Keeps a Score, How to Be Perfect. And this book really helped me understand much of my life and how to analyze it and stuff. So again, the book club and my reading helps me answer, okay, how does the world work? How do I fit in? I'm 66. I've got maybe a quarter of my life left. I'm gay. I didn't come out until I retired. And this book really describes, I'm just going like every time, every chapter I'm going like, oh yeah, that was part of my life. So I want to thank you. This is part of me being able to understand how my life is played out, and also helping me to go forward on, what my choices are going to be and how I interact with people, my TBM family. I live in California, so the church isn't a big factor here. It never was with my work, but my family is still at least 75% in the church. So this is really good.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Bruce. Celia.
Oh, hi, I'm Celia. So I wanted to delve a little bit more into the whole idea of by their fruits ye shall know them. Luna, you touched on that a little bit in the book, and you talked about, some of the goodness from the people that, they believe in family and hard work. And as long as you fit in their little specific, peg, then they're comfortable. And there is a lot of good. And that's important to recognize. I think they're mostly sincere, LDS. However, I've never heard it talked about when you mention from anybody, by their fruits ye shall know them. I always think about all the offshoots that came from the original doctrines of the church, the blood atonement, the polygamy, and a lot of really dark things that LDS church now just wants to put, hide away and sweep under the rug. And unfortunately, it is a part of their history that is, you can't deny it. I come from one of the offshoots. My father, you mentioned him in the book. My father was Ervil LeBaron. And he not only taught all his children blood atonement, but he sent his children out to blood atone. And so to me, that is one of the fruits of this whole organization, unfortunately. And there are so many of them that are extremely abusive. And anyway, what do you think about including that in the fruits of this whole organization?
I agree with that. And I think that even definitely the offshoots, the more extreme offshoots that we see today are fruits of Joseph Smith's original work. And honestly, going back all of Christianity's original work, the forced conversions and colonizations and all of that. And even the LDS Church has so much blood on its hands. I don't remember if I had drawn this conclusion by the time I wrote my book, but oftentimes people bring up, well, what about Jonestown? What about the suicide cults and all the suicides? Well, if you compare all of the suicides that happen in the Mormon Church for people who don't feel like they fit in, LGBT people are definitely at the forefront of that, but pretty much anybody who, for whatever reason, doesn't feel like they can conform to the gender roles or any of the strictness of it, and doesn't feel accepted by their family and by their community, suicide rates go up. And just because it doesn't happen all on one day doesn't negate the thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies. So yes, by their fruits, both LDS and FLDS and all the offshoots, the little ones, the big ones, all of them, we have to look at both the good things that they do and the bad things we do. And I try to encourage more of the good things. And, we hope that awareness maybe, or the activism efforts that so many progressive nuanced Mormons and post-Mormons are doing will maybe make some change. We're starting to see some little bit of change. People and organizations change only as much as they feel that they need to get what they want. It's just a human tendency that we all have. And so the church is making these little tiny sort of surface level changes, and hopefully that we can keep the pressure on them and they can start maybe making some more effectual changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia.
You're welcome.
I think I thought I saw one more hand, but Landon. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I thought Debbie's hand was up, but I'll go ahead. This deception at part 3, the idea of the deception, to me that's just been the killer. When I was studying, when I was trying to determine, is this true or not, it it wasn't so much the facts that I was finding, although those were very damning. I think I still would have left, but it was the deception. And when I found out they knew all of this, they knew this, and they were keeping it from me. And I see that being repeated over and over again from people. It's the hiding and the lying that is hurting people more than anything. These are the men we trusted for our entire life. We looked to these men to be, you know, they were the men next to God. They were walking and talking with God. And now we're finding out that they know this information and they're keeping it from us. And even now, when the essays have come out and so many people are leaving, they continue to do it. It's almost as if, and maybe it's because it is not true that they have to do that to keep members in, but it's just so frustrating as I look at the things they're putting out now. We're doing with Backyard Professor tonight, we're looking at the 13 top gospel topic essays. And one of the things we looked at as they were rolling those out is that the first two essays had nothing to do with any of the problems that people had with the church, but they were rolling them out because they were criticisms of the church that were from the outside that people inside wouldn't really be concerned about, to kind of throw you off of, okay, here comes some other stuff coming. And everything I see, they're doing that in. They use these weasel words. They use, you know, the tithing. We didn't use tithing funds to build the City Creek Center. And now we find out, you know, it was the interest from the tithing funds. Like, you could separate. There's always this deception. It's just like they can't just tell the truth. And to me, that was the most harmful part of everything, was the deception. I think it continues to be, as people see this, that's going to be the part that just really kills them, even worse than the historical problems with the church.
Yeah, and deception, honestly, is what makes it unhealthy. It's what makes it unethical. You know, if they told you everything up front, in, you know, whether in the fine print or in the bold print or whatever, and you knew and you still signed up for that, then, you know, you might be harming other people. But as far as the individual is concerned who agrees to that, what harm is there? I mean, you're agreeing to it, right? So really, that is the biggest line drawn between, you know, I mean, you look at the U.S. military, and it uses a lot of, I disagree with a lot of the military actions that we do and with how much money we're spending on the military, but at least they're mostly honest and upfront about what they're up to. I mean, we're up to going and fighting people and breaking things. And so because of that, I think it is more acceptable to society and a little bit more ethical than, say, if all of that was covert and hidden and nobody involved knew what was going on.
Thank you, Landon. We have time for one more, and then we're going to have to move along. Luann.
Okay, my question is just how. You know, we're discussing what, but how? It's like there's a blueprint and they build it. Joseph Smith, I mean, it's taken maybe thousands of people's contributions to make this organism of control. I don't believe in a devil anymore, but it sure would be convenient to think it was a devil and it was a master plan that he'd set up. What are your thoughts, Luna, about how cults are born and how they live, survive, how they grow?
Yeah, it's institutionalized narcissism, and I mean that in the more clinical definition of that, not the someone who looks at themselves in the mirror too much. I'm talking about like someone who has a very fragile and super inflated ego, who we all have fragile and super inflated egos, but someone who externalizes that ego and needs everyone around them to reinforce who they are and what they need. It's all about them, and they'll manipulate and do whatever. And I think that Joseph Smith was probably, it's difficult to armchair diagnose through the centuries, but he definitely shows all the patterns of a typical malignant narcissist who he just needed everyone around him to reinforce who he was and would stop at nothing. He had the charm. A lot of narcissists are very charming, and people tend to like them. There's that likability. We tend to trust people that we like. And I think that pretty much everything that I would call a cult, besides maybe Scientology, was sort of arrived naturally. So Joseph Smith was born. His father doesn't seem like a good guy either. So in the trauma of his family situation, he would have reacted to protect himself. Some people react in that way by becoming more submissive or trying to appease people, or all these different strategies. But narcissists tend to take the strategy of just trying to control everything. And so as a child, he would have begun to experiment with, if I do or say this, people do what I want. If I do or say that, people don't like me or reject what I want. And so just over time, he began to build up these methods on his own through trial and error. So it's only really been since the 1950s, since Robert J. Lifton and his crew, that we started to see these concepts codified, that we started to see the manipulation methods sort of figured out and reverse engineered, if you will. So I think it just sort of grew from Joseph Smith. Brigham Young then was sort of the strongest narcissist that followed him, and therefore took over the Brighamite arm of the church. And then from there, the organization just kind of became like its own thing. If you ever want to study memetics, memes aren't just internet pictures that people spread around. They sort of, the theory is that memes are their own life form that then takes on a life of its own and struggles for survival. And so the Mormon church kind of, in my opinion, now is this sort of living being that is struggling to survive, just like Joseph Smith was. And it's trying all these different strategies. It's using the old strategies, but some of those aren't working. So it's trying new strategies. And I think that in some ways it's maybe beyond the control of the leaders of the church at this point. I don't think there's any one person in the church that could just say, oh, hold up, let's reevaluate this. I think it's just, they're all sort of limbs or cells or organs, if you will, of the larger being, and they're under the control of that being to a certain extent. So we'll see, I guess, if it lives or survives into the next century. So
Thank you, Luann. That was a fantastic question. Okay, thank you, everybody. Great comments. We're going to have to move along here. And I'm going to have to go through this next section a little faster. So we're going to go into the thick of thought reform methods. We're going to get into the next several in this segment. The next one is mystical manipulation. Mystical manipulation includes magical thinking that there are forces in play more powerful than the self. The group is serving a higher purpose. There are spiritual and supernatural infusions in many of the experiences that we have within the church. The teaching of wages of sin, coupled with the miracle of forgiveness, and that becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. We see spiritual and supernatural stuff infused into missions and prophecy, in prayer, in tithing, in the word of wisdom, things that happen that we just expect, or the things that happen that are good, we attribute to miracles, regardless of whether, it was a coincidence or not. There are loops of logic. Every conclusion says, yes, the church is true. When you start going through your logic exercises. That was rather eye-opening for me too. Reality. So how do we keep grounded in reality? And for me, the thing that stood out and that came to my mind was the tremendous psychological benefits that have come into my life by finally admitting I don't know. And what a wonderful institutional relief that would be, I think, if we could all admit we don't know, we don't have the answers. I think that helps us to keep more grounded in reality. Milieu control. Information and environment is tightly controlled, which is kind of it rules reality. This becomes our reality. Gossip, questioning, criticisms tightly regulated. I can't, for example, feel comfortable raising my hand and making a comment in class without feeling that there's going to be some huge backlash or impact because of asking such a question. Doctrine correlation. Another word for that is whitewash. Basically everything's perfectly aligned. Everything is all neat and tidy. We don't look at all the stuff that we can't explain. Outside non-correlated information about the group is fiercely prescribed. In fact, it's a sin if you are to reach outside of the group to actually look for information. Outside friends and media. Spiritual preparedness becomes training on how to dispel cognitive dissonance. If you're spiritually prepared, then you basically know how to dismiss all those nasty little thoughts that pop into your mind. The family milieu. There are members of my family who are looking at my journey as complete betrayal. And I've discovered that in a lot of cases, it really is better just to keep silent, keep my mouth shut, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm experiencing this control every day. There are miscellaneous other things, what gets publicized, a doctrine that just kind of disappears. Like, oh, we never said that. We don't emphasize, President Hinckley saying we don't emphasize that anymore, or whatever. Things that just float away and we never hear about it again. But there's no announcement, there's no explanation for why the doctrine is changing. It just suddenly disappears off of churchofjesuschrist.org. And then the infamous Strengthening Church Members Committee. I have to chuckle at that because part of me wonders if maybe they've got my number. Here's a lovely quote. Without restrictions, this is the vision of where we could be. Without restrictions on where we get information, there are abundant sources of wisdom and comfort, insight and wonder. There are millions of writers, creators, researchers, and professionals who share valuable pieces of their experience. The world is rich with inspiration. Take what works for you, embrace what speaks to you. If there is anything lovely, virtuous, of good report, or praiseworthy, seek after those things no matter what the origin. I love that quote. And, in my own personal experience, I have loved nothing more than studying all these wonderful outside resources and diving into Eastern philosophies and all kinds of different scientific concepts and ways of looking at reality. And it has been very enriching for me as a human being. So demand for purity, perpetual inadequacy. This is a real thing. We have lofty moral goals. So, they seem quite achievable to the naive member, the 8-year-old who's getting baptized, or the new deacon or young woman entering into the young women's program. Maybe the new convert. Yeah, we can do this. But then as we push comes to shove and the standards suddenly, we realize how impossible they are to keep. That keeps us perpetually inadequate. Mission accomplished. Since we're perpetually inadequate, then we're always in need of the church. The incompatibility between the two concepts of perfection and eternal progression. That was a huge eye-opener for me, that perfection is something we all strive for, but so is eternal progression. So how do you do both? Often common human frailties are targeted for some of these standards. Instinctual drives are demonized. And for decades throughout my life, I thought I was the only one with such diabolical failures. But it turns out we're all in the same boat. We're all struggling with the same stuff. Keeps us perpetually hanging on. Dispensing of existence. Our very existence is at stake. Hanging in the balance is nothing short of life, the eternal soul, your self-esteem, sense of being good, and your own identity. Pretty tall glass of water there. Consequences of impurity, doubt, or leaving the group are huge. One that I wanted to add and emphasize is the concept of that families can be together forever. You know, we tout that as such a wonderful thing, and yet what a horrible teaching it is. Because if families can be together forever, that means that families also might not. And we emphasize and practically worship eternal families in the church. And the pernicious evil trap is that you may become separated from your families forever and have that hanging over your head with all, you know, your doubt and struggling. Doctrine over self. The individual is subordinate to the group, leader, and teachings. And if your personal desires, goals, values conflict with the group, they become, then it's just simply selfish and immoral. Loading language, words loaded with new meaning. New words are added, such as entertaining doubts, persecution, worthiness. Translation is no longer a translation. Godly sorrow, which is basically another word for shame. And then eternal life means something totally different to members of the church than it does to most people outside the church. Other words have been banned or dropped. To say the word Mormon now is a complete and total sin. And all these language changes affect our ability to think or communicate effectively outside of the group. Totalist reframing, situations reinterpreted to suit the group, draw desired conclusions, used to prove ideology correct, and squelch doubts and silence outsiders. Emotions are regularly reframed to mean something which will benefit the group. Thought terminating cliches, short phrases that are used, or metaphors, pat answers, or emotional reactions that are pre-established to halt any sort of dialogue. Arguments, doubts, and questions are automatically shut down. That's why you don't raise your hand in class and make that comment. Social pressure. You know, we're all social animals and looking for acceptance. So acceptance and rejection are used as a form of reward and punishment. Member becomes driven with the desire to conform. Belief follows behavior. Your actions generate associated beliefs. So you just, you know, you live the commandments, and then you'll know that it's true, right? Public commitment. Commitments expressed aloud, so that everyone can hear. Yep, they're definitely in. They're safe. They're part of the group. Public statements reinforce belief and dedication to the group. Creating dependency. Member depending on the group for physical, emotional, social, and spiritual needs. And when it's everything that you've ever known throughout your life, you know, you're born in the covenant, or it's been a huge part of your life growing up, it really is pervasive. It just totally takes over your life, and you become completely dependent. There are high stakes in remaining loyal or turning disloyal, for that matter. Black and white thinking. Our broad spectrums of thought and morality are reduced to binaries. Good versus evil, love versus hate, weak versus strong, humble versus proud. Everything's black and white. Elitism. Members are chosen people, exalted, righteous, the chosen generation. Members made to feel special and set apart from outsiders. We even use that term set apart when someone is given a new calling. And then the us versus them thinking, which is a type of black and white dehumanization. Ex-members, critics are labeled as evil, apostate, vicious, hateful, prideful, blinded, deceived, etc. Persecution complex, where reasonable criticism is reframed as an attack. So we went through that section pretty quick. Does anybody have any comments or questions on what we just covered there? Landon.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to take up all the questions, but the one that you said there really impacted me when you were talking about doctrine over self. When I was home teaching, going up in the church, I'd take my boys over. We'd help the single lady clean out the gutters that were full of leaves and stuff, and you'd help her plant her garden and move dirt or whatever at certain times of the year. And you did all those things, and you think, boy, I should be, developing a relationship with this person when I'm doing all of this stuff for them. But then you realize, after I got out of the church, I realized that none of those people came over and asked anything of what's going on. Why is this, why did you leave? And I began to realize that I didn't do that stuff for them. They saw it as the church did that for them. And I was just an extension of the church. I had become the church. And my relationship moved around with my assignment. If I was assigned someone else as the home teacher, my relationship with that person was for that time. And then I'd move again because I was just the church. I was just the representative from the church. And I realized I really had lost my identity. And it was whenever the ward split, all these people that were your friends, all of a sudden you didn't talk to them anymore because they were in that ward and you're in this ward and you had to do your own thing. So I really realized after that I had become the church, and the church was me. There was no me per se. So I really had lost my identity, I felt.
Yeah, that's true. And in these sort of situations, whether it's an organization like the Mormon Church or like my situation with a narcissistic abuser, really people are not seen as individuals, as autonomous beings with our own senses and consciousness and feelings. We become extensions of the group or of that narcissistic individual. We are that mirror that is meant to reflect the image that organization wants to reflect to the world and to each other, rather than people with sincere connections with one another. Yeah, so really unfortunate.
Thank you, Landon. Lynette.
Hi. Yeah, this whole section really hit me hard. By the way, can I just ask Sean, can we get a copy of these slides? They are really good. They're a great outline for this wonderful book.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Thanks. Okay, one of the things that I have thought about a lot actually since leaving is, well, Landon pointed out that, I'm not a person, I'm just part of this organization. And my husband and I have talked about how, who am I really inside, and trying to find that individual in ourselves and who we would be without the church. And granted, there are a lot of things I've learned from the church. For example, I learned to play the organ, which I would not have learned without the church. I learned how to give lessons, which I probably would not have learned without the church. Things like that were really helpful in my life in other areas as well. But one of the things that really hit me was the shame thing, because every time I went to talk to the bishop, I felt like I had done something wrong, even if I had never done anything that would be considered a sin. And that kind of control over your life is just really, it's terrible to have that hanging over you. I never felt adequate. I always felt like I should be doing more. And since then, I'm trying to get rid of those things. And I talked to someone recently who had known me previously, and they said to me, wow, you are so different now. You're actually a real person, in so many words. So Luna, could you just talk about that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, I think you described it all pretty well. All of those things are definitely a part of it. Shame and that inadequacy, it kind of puts a lot of us into that appease mode. So there's four ways to react to trauma. There's more than four ways, but that they sum it up to fight, flight, freeze, or appease. I've heard other acronyms for it as well. You know, those of us who have what I would call a good moral compass, we just have instincts to try to be people pleasers and take care of each other, and we're earnest and sincere in those beliefs. Yeah, we put ourselves in that submissive position, or allow ourselves to go into that submissive position because it's easier, it's safer, it's what's expected of us. You know, whether or not the bishop wants you to feel ashamed or not, it's just what the system does to all of us. And the unfortunate part is some people, for whatever reason, a much smaller percentage of the population, they look at all those rules and think, yeah, those rules apply to everyone else and not me. And they don't feel that shame, and they don't feel that that need to sort of shrink away from the danger. They want to be the danger. They're like, well, if I want to have any power in this situation, then I'll take that top role of using that shame against other people. And they can put on the act, and they can pretend to fit in and be doing what everyone else is doing. So they can be really hard to spot if you don't really know what red flags to look for, especially if you're not close to that person and sort of privy to maybe the way they talk about other people, and the way they behave in private. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I have to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Tom.
I'm just going to add a comment, an observation, Luna, that when I read this book, your book, thank you, by the way, I know you were very vocal in the beginning about how you didn't want to offend or upset your family. And I really felt like you kept true to that. So I never felt like this was an overt attack, which is weird because we read a lot of things online that, you know, people are upset and they attack, and we can get carried away and really attack as a group. But I don't know. I just wanted to say that. I didn't feel that. And so I really was able to read it as, yeah, instead of all the emotion of being upset, which obviously I was while I read it. But I didn't feel like you were trying to get me to be angry because you were angry, or you were, well, maybe you were, but you were not leading with that. You were leading with, this is what happened. That's what I felt like happened. So thank you. That's all I had. That was just a comment.
Thank you. And I think anger is a really important emotion. It tells us when something is hurting us, and that we aren't able to resolve with the first sort of lines of other emotions that we feel. So anger is that frustration of this thing isn't going away, and it hurts. When we can process the anger, when we can resolve the thing that's causing the hurt in some way, then the anger will naturally go away. And so that's kind of part of my goal with this book, is to help people. I was a moderator on postmormon.org before I wrote this book, and in the mid 00s, around 2007, a little bit before and after that. And unfortunately, postmormon.org is no more. It was a wonderful, wonderful forum before Facebook took over everything, and Reddit and everything. And we noticed this sort of pattern that would happen where people would come on. Usually they'd start with one of the other forums, what we called the Mad Boards, which was Recovery from Mormonism, where people would just go in and they would do what we see like a lot on Reddit now, which is just sort of like lambast the church, because they were working through that anger. And then we'd notice people would come to sites like ours sort of after that initial time period, whatever it was, a few months, a year, a couple of years, whatever it was. And then they'd come to postmormon.org, and there we would have these sort of intellectual discussions. And we noticed that most of the users would spend about a year or two on our site. So like a year or two on another site and a year or two on our site. And so there was this like 2 to 3 year period where people were really heavily processing their post-Mormon phase. And then we would get the post, hey guys, it's been great. Learned a lot. I've made a lot of friends here, but I'm just not feeling it anymore. I've got these other hobbies and interests. I'm going to go off and do that now. And we'd all say goodbye. And I had my own time, although I keep coming back to it because I'm intellectually interested in it as well. But yeah, that's if we can process anger, anger can be really healthy. It's only when we get stuck in anger for whatever reason, whether it's our own attitudes towards it or because the problem, you know, there are situations where the problem cannot be solved and it will continue to hurt us, you know, forever. And in those cases, the anger stays.
And just to add on, just a question, I guess I should ask this. I think I was asking this, is how did you do that without unleashing maybe what the obvious, maybe the anger, maybe that was, I don't know, if you had any, you didn't show it so overtly, but how did you contain it, keep it down so it didn't become this just big, I'm lashing out at the church rant?
I have my times. I still have my times. I've got my issues that get me riled up still. I think the sexual abuse cover-ups, that one always gets me. Back when I was reading the Mormon Alliance case studies, they're still up, by the way. Lavina Fielding Anderson and forgetting the other, I think one of the Toscanos was involved in that. And, you know, I went and read those like early on, and yeah, that kind of stuff. We've known about that since the mid 90s, at least. People have been writing about that since the mid 90s, at least. And that one gets me. But yeah, I had my times. I think there weren't really any ex-Mormon communities when I first left to speak of. And I didn't really feel pulled towards them anyway. That wasn't really an option for me. So I was on a lot of IRC chat rooms and internet activities of various kinds. And so I probably was angry in my own ways, just towards religion in general at the time. Yeah, by the time I wrote Recovering Agency, I had intellectualized it quite a bit, pretty heavily at that point, and I'd been out of the church for a decade plus at that point. So, you know, a lot of it just takes time and consciousness. I think those two, time, consciousness, and a sense of empowerment to solve whatever problems are still being caused, those things can help dissipate at least a lot of the anger.
Well, I like the way you handled that and the way you were sensitive about it, because at the end of the day, you allowed us then to react the way we would react rather than being influenced by an overt, you know, emotion or something. So thank you again.
Yeah,
that's all.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Luna. Okay, we will proceed to the third and final segment of the discussion topic here. Continuing with thought reform methods. Indirect directives. This is a little irksome for me. Behavior demands are implied, not expressed. Logical elements are supplied, leaving members to draw the desired conclusion themselves, quote unquote, themselves. Leadership remains innocent of any bad teachings. We never said that, is what we may hear. And unfortunately, that's pretty prevalent as you dig into the doctrine of the church. It becomes quite a rat's nest of indirect directives. The next one is influence through identification and example. Others' behavior is used as good or bad examples, and the desired behavior is therefore inferred. The mind relates strongly to stories. You know, we are a storytelling, story-listening people, and nothing impacts the mind quite like the stories that we hear. So we hear stories, and that implies whatever truth they're trying to share. Stories may be completely reframed or totally untrue, but taught as truth anyway. They demonstrate consequences, and then it inspires the desired social pressure to conform. Emotion over intellect. Emotion preferred. Emotion is the preferred decision-making tool, not just decision-making, but truth discovering as well. Using reason is downplayed, ignored, or even rejected. And teaching styles are often very much tied into the delivery, the emotions, the cheerful stories, the gentle tones, the solemn testimonies, etc. I struggle with that one a little bit because when I was serving as bishop, I'm an emotional person. And so a lot of times I'd be up at the pulpit sharing something very touching, and I couldn't hold back the tears. And then I looked back and thought, is that right? Is that normal for us to be so, to use our emotions so easily? But, I guess my thought is we are empathetic people. And some of us maybe are better at being vulnerable than others. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. But I think where it gets twisted is when it's used theatrically, or when it's purposefully injected to get some sort of a desired response to strengthen somebody's belief, when it's not necessarily genuine. Induced phobias. We have all kinds of fears that are instilled that are probably based on imaginary stuff. It may be based on real or exaggerated consequences, and it may be based on artificial effects created from group pressure. And, there's probably examples of phobias that we could all relate to. You don't pay your tithing, you might burn, or you might lose your job, or your garments, you might, get in an accident and get injured or whatnot. Transinduction and dissociative states. Critical thinking is reduced through encouragement of receptive mental states, such as, fasting and prayer, the types of things that we do, which maybe alter our mental thinking or mental state. Altered states seem mild or normal, but it affects our concentration. It can bring on fatigue, boredom, hunger, etc., which may make us more susceptible to influence. Time control. I think anybody who's served in a calling that was a little bit demanding on time can relate to this. There's not much time left to question beliefs, to examine your life, or to be influenced by outside social life. We talk about living in the world, but not being of the world. But in many cases, it's really hard to even be in the world when you're a member of the church, because you're constantly on the go, and you've made your time dedicated to the group is expected. Through the law of consecration, you've promised that you would dedicate all your time and talents and so forth. And it often fills every spare moment. I've noticed the church has started to lighten up on this. Fortunately, when I was serving as bishop, my stake president, one of the first things he told me was to not try and do it all, that I could wear myself out, and that I needed to have balance and spend dedicated time towards my family. I don't think that advice has always been given throughout the history of the church, but I've noticed that it is happening more, and people are being a lot more sensitive to those sort of demands, which, maybe it's a local thing, and leadership roulette, that kind of thing. But I'm grateful that at least that has been my experience. The double bind. Members are damned if you do and damned if you don't. And the book that Luna references regarding the double bind in their book is really, really good in kind of laying out all the different ways that we get caught up into this double bind. We could spend an entire event just talking about that. And then you're left to either betray the group or betray your own integrity. This was my experience in November of 2015 when I was standing up at the pulpit trying to explain to the members with a member of the stake presidency sitting behind me why it was such a great thing that the policy of exclusion came out. And the whole time I was just dying inside. And just, yeah, it was a double bind. No matter what I did, if I could either choose to follow my own conscience or I could choose to fall in. Blame reversal. The church, leadership, doctrine, and now policy are above reproach. In fact, if you speak out against a church policy now, that's grounds for disciplinary counsel and possible excommunication, according to the new updated handbook of instructions. Failed promises and bad results are always the fault of the member, never the fault of the church. Guilt and shame. So guilt, this is sort of a cycle of guilt and shame, where you have repressed doubts, and then you have social pressures, and then failure to meet standards, and they just kind of feed on each other, exasperating the shame and the guilt as you fall into this cycle. There's a difference between guilt and shame, and Luna does a great job of kind of differentiating these. My take was that guilt is really more of your moral inner compass, whereas shame is the social or tribal compass. And when it enters into the public forum, it becomes a public matter, you have this strong desire to want to fit in, and that shame really drives a lot. It's an engine that keeps churning and churning inside the minds of our members, and they become very susceptible to it. Understanding and love are the cure for shame. There are unintended consequences for this. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of self-harm. There's been a lot of damaged emotionally damaged people who are now seeking therapy, and even those who have chosen to end their lives because of shame. Shame is a very powerful, very vicious, very damaging thing in our lives. I think one of the things that started me on this journey was well before I ever ran across any doctrinal issues or any disagreements with policy. It's a couple of years before that, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to try and get rid of the shame in my life. I was reading Brene Brown and learning more about shame, and realized what a vicious thing it was. And I decided right then I was going to do whatever it took to get that out of my life. And that kind of started the process for me. The shame of sex, sex is an LDS obsession. It is our favorite thing to be fearful of and talk about and warn people of. It is the sin next to murder. Therefore, there's a lot of shame for something that is such a normal part of our lives. And then that leads to confession. Confession is a process of surrendering. I love that, the way that Luna put this in the book. It totally is. It's the process of surrendering yourself to the leaders. It reduces privacy and boundaries. The process of purification may bring temporary relief and an increase in dedication, and it's motivating. It becomes a motivation to obey and avoid the confession. Unfortunately, my experience has been that it's not so motivating to avoid the sin but it's more motivating to lie about it because you just don't want to have to go through that process. It's so painful. So there's a lot of lying that happens, and I've seen it, and I still see it. People who just they're sick of the control, the punishment that happens through the shame process, the shame, confession, repentance process. Euphoria induction, group participation, and fulfilling. It becomes fulfilling of our ideals. Motivates for good behavior, reducing doubt, proving validity of the group, loss of individuality, and trance-inducement. The illusion of a spiritual high, often following a time of stress. And, we all live stressful lives. And if we find any sort of relief with anything that may be remotely related to the church, then that becomes an answer to prayer. It becomes, hey, the church must be true because I feel so much better now. Proselytizing. Members are encouraged to teach outsiders. I think the latest program they have is now called Love, Share, and Invite. It's gone by many other names in the past, and that's just the latest trademark. Purpose is to maintain growth, to soothe cognitive dissonance. It's also time-consuming, and it's an opportunity to show commitment. And another quote from Luna: "If I preach anything," and this is how I feel too. This is how I would love everyone to be. That if I preach anything, it is that each person needs to seek their own path, adopting beliefs that lead to inner awareness, acceptance, and self-actualization. By necessity, all such paths will be very different from one another. And I think that's just beautiful. That is far and away what we do within the church. Bait, hook, line, and sinker. Basically, this section, as we get towards the end, demonstrates how there are multiple methods in play, and they all work together to sort of create this web and ensnare and trap us. I remember sharing my testimony once, and I even used these words, and I was so in and so determined, so believing, that I testified to the congregation that I accepted all of it: hook, line, sinker, and fishing pole. And that was because I thought it was true. I think if we believe it's true, if we believe it's real, then it's worth any sacrifice. And we can overcome any doubt if we have that foundation of belief. And so that's what keeps so many TBMs going, is that they just believe so strongly. They don't allow any of the cognitive dissonance. They don't allow any of the logic or self-actualization or mind expansion to happen within their own lives, within their own minds, because nothing else could even remotely be possible. So this brings us to our conclusion: fleeing the garden. And I kind of looked at this section as the deconstruction process, and I put in parentheses grieving. There's a grieving process that has to take place. The getting over it, that's probably the angry stage. The recovering, that's the acceptance, that's the healing stage. And then the thriving, once you get over it, once you recover, the good news is that you can thrive. That there's an expanding world out there. And then there's your own personal expansion that happens in the process. And, these aren't necessarily linear. I may feel like I'm really thriving one day, and then the next day, all of a sudden, I'm in that angry stage again. And you know, and there's always healing that has to take place, and the acceptance of things. But it doesn't mean that you can't thrive. I think even when you're in those modes, even when you are dealing with anger or with, you know, frustration, or dealing with TBMs who you just can't communicate with, or going through a recovery process, to be able to reach out and to be able to look at what's out there. There's such a richness out there in the world to discover, and that thriving can happen. It can happen right now. And then Luna talks a lot about all the support that's available. There's lots of support. There's tremendous resources, and there's more and more being added. You know, it would be difficult to keep up a single website that has all the resources that are available. They're just really coming on fiercely and strongly, and from all walks of life. I belong to a marriage on a tightrope group, and the men who are the husbands who are non-believing, who have believing spouses. We kind of belong to this special Marco Polo group, and we're on there all the time, posting therapeutic things that we have to get off our chest, and giving each other encouragement and sharing stories. And that alone has been a tremendous support for me. And there's other resources out there, but I think that's the end of that section. Yep. So we have the summary of the third segment there. If anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to make on any of those things we just talked about.
I'm going to jump in real quick because Christine had a question in the chat a few minutes ago. So if you don't mind, I'll just ask that and answer it. So Christine asks, what tools are there to help a person detect when undue influence is being employed? First of all, awareness can really help. Actually, I should start by saying that there's no bulletproof way to completely protect yourself from all types of undue influence and manipulation out there. As I mentioned before, much to my chagrin, you know, I felt really dumb. I don't like using dumb, but I felt really dumb after leaving my abuser. And while I was writing this book, you described him. So there's always a message out there that might appeal to you, that might not be a fully ethical message. So we kind of just have to do our best to be as aware as possible, because that's the problem with this stuff, is it's deceptive, right? So it's really hard to tell if their lie is really, really good. But learning to spot those red flags, and I'd say even more importantly, learning to trust your intuition and instincts. That's something that the church suppressed in us and taught us to suppress, and it's taken me many, many years to learn how to trust my instincts and intuition. You don't always know when your intuition is right, because sometimes your intuition can be wrong too. Sometimes your intuition can be manipulated, but that initial gut feeling of something isn't right here, just like learn to pay attention to that and ask more questions and dig deeper and become more observant when you see those red flags. And I'll leave you with one more, is a quote from one of my favorite shows, BoJack Horseman. One of the characters in that show says that when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags. So that's just, I don't want to leave everyone feeling mistrustful of everything all the time, but you kind of have to keep like a little bit of mistrust in a healthy dose with everything. So thanks for that question, Christine. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Luna. Bruce.
Yeah, I just had some, just my own thoughts on fleeing the garden, getting over it, recover and thrive. I think the concept of finding community or finding your family and friends of choice is something that we have to do. I'm still, on fairly good terms with my family, but I describe my family as polite acquaintances, and my close family my parents have passed away. Half my siblings have passed away already. And, I have nieces and nephews, and we're polite to each other and stuff, but I've developed family of choice and friends of choice, and then also therapists. I've had the same therapist for 5 or 6 years now. He's never Mormon. He's also gay. It's just very helpful to have somebody you can talk to openly and honestly about everything and stuff. So that family and friends of choice, I think, is the way that post-Mormons need to develop those two aspects of family and friends of choice, because that's how we recover and thrive. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's
Thank
that's
you.
good input. The social sort of, well, I mean, it's using some of these methods, which many of these thought control methods have a positive side or an ethical use case, and I think that social proof is can be a very healthy thing, especially when we have some level of choice and empowerment in those family connections, that found family. As a lot of us from the queer community are very familiar with the feeling of found family, and having to just kind of, when our own family isn't there for us, find that in those around us, those we choose, and that's really important. Yeah.
Thank you. Nelson.
Yes, I really like the discussion about the double bind. That's the church all over again. You aren't getting the answer to your prayers. Well, you're not praying hard. Well, or that whole thing over and over and over again. I'd never really thought of it in those terms or heard of the double bind, but I thought that was definitely very. As I listened to it on Audible, and as I listened to it, it's like, yeah, that was my life over and over and over again. And I've early on in the book club, I told people, the way I left the church is I just got bored. It wasn't anything that I was particularly concerned about or didn't believe or any particular doctrine. It was just I was bored, and so I had to go find something else to keep me more excited. But I really like that part. And then there was one part, Luna, I'm going to say here a little bit, maybe might come across a little critical at first, but when I finish what I'm saying, I think it won't be as critical. Again, listening to it, sometimes I would get out of the car and I'd come back to the car and it's like, man, did my audio recording go back to something I already heard again? Because there was parts of it that I thought got a little bit repetitive as far as the same type of story over and over and over again. But then after I thought about it, I thought, you know what? That's really what we lived through. The repetitive over and over and over and over again. And then I'd listen, well, wait, that story's a little bit different than the one that was told before, but it's the same, but it's a little bit different and that's definitely the kind of the cycle I think that we see a lot throughout the whole process. So after I thought about it a little bit more, my criticalness of the, it's kind of repetitive, kind of went away, because I think there was a little bit more behind that than just, I got to fill up a couple more pages. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very detail oriented, and I'm a completionist. So I feel often like I have to put everything in there. And there's actually a lot of stuff I cut from this, a lot of stuff I wanted to include in here. But I probably did get a little repetitive just because I'm like, I want to make sure that this detail gets covered. So thank you for that feedback.
Thanks, Nelson. Lori.
Okay, I debated back and forth whether I should say anything, but it kind of goes back to what Tom was saying, how he really struggled. Like, I really struggle. Like, I feel I'm in a better place, but I would like to share with all of my True Blue member family members how that's because of black and white thinking. That's because of this. This is why you're struggling. And I'm wondering, this is new for me, but I'm wondering if that's still anger that's taking place. And by the way, Luna, you're like one of the very first Mormon stories I listened to, all like 25,000 hours that you did, but it was so good. So I couldn't wait. I bought the book and was excited. So anyway, back to the question. Is that still the anger phase because I'm still new, or is that me just can't keeping my mouth shut? I don't know. Because that's not the journey they're on.
Yeah, that's a great question. And try to pick where to start because I have a lot of thoughts coming up from that. I don't know that it's necessarily anger. I mean that it could be anger. We learned through Mormonism sort of a lack of boundaries. We learned that we needed to control people around us, and we needed to accept people controlling us because there was so much at stake. If someone wasn't doing what we thought we should do, we needed to let them know and correct them, and that is just something that's in us. So some of it is learning healthy boundaries, and some of it's deciding when should we influence someone and when shouldn't we? When should we let them make their own choices? And that's a really fine line to walk, and it's up to each person to figure out what that is, what's too much and what isn't. One of the spiritual quotes that I live by, probably more than anything else, is the Serenity Prayer. Which goes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And as I study Eastern philosophy, I mean, that's really Buddhism in a nutshell. And Buddhism is very much about when should I let go? When should I try to change something? When should I put effort in, and when should I relax? There's a lot of that in Taoism as well. The yin yang, the push pull. So it's really just, do you need them to change for something that you need, or is it for something that they need? And can you really know their needs? My own approach is often just very subtle, very gentle. Put the information out there in a subtle and easy to digest way. And if they engage with it, then engage back with them. And if they don't, then just let it go, because it's their life and it's their choices. Another approach that I read a lot about in the literature, if you're really interested in engaging with them more on that, is to use examples from other groups. So, I was just watching Going Clear the other day, and there was a former Scientologist on there who was talking about this thing, and I read somewhere else that that's called black and white thinking, and what do you think about that, right? And it just sort of with an eye to engaging them and having them be present as a person rather than being just another object. We're just treating the object differently than the church taught us to treat. So, yeah, thank you for that.
I think you hit it on the head, because I am a perfectionist from where I came from, and then also super controlling, especially with my family, because if they weren't in line, they weren't going to be with me. And so I was very difficult to be with, and I think you really nailed that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. So I have a question for you, Luna. I'm going to stop sharing here. First of all, I just want to say what a privilege this has been for me to go through this process and really dig deep into your book.
Thank you.
And I found it one of the most mind-expanding books that I've read in my journey. And I want to thank you for putting all this together and just really helping to sort it out and put it all on paper. And there's so much there, and it just all makes so much sense. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's high praise.
My question is, how much are you still living in this post-Mormon space, as far as your creativity goes, your writing, the stuff that you're producing, or have you been able to move on? What do you have coming in the future?
Well, this has sort of become my thing, I guess. I'm disabled, aforementioned abuser. So I, with autism and burnout, and because my coping strategy is to work hard, and so I worked too hard on this book and the other things in my life at the time with my abuser. So I'm dealing with chronic fatigue and PTSD and all kinds of crap. So I can't really work full time anymore. But what I am working on, a couple of things. I'm very excited. I'm working with Natasha Helfer to write her excommunication story, and also just about her life as well. I'm really excited about that. So that's what I'm doing I'm a ghostwriter, so that's what I'm doing for my living. I have a couple of projects I'd like to get to someday. I have been working on, although not this year, but last year, on what I'm calling a scripture, because I think that anything that's inspirational is a scripture. And I think that anybody has the right to speak for God, whatever that means. So that's why I'm calling it a scripture. But I'm sort of working on a book that is sort of looking forward to, how can we rebuild a spirituality that's inspired by Mormonism, that isn't authoritarian? Another way to describe it is my parents were contending with me quite a bit, over this whole me not being Mormon anymore thing. And I was like, well, what if I wrote down all of my, like, the way, if Mormon doctrine changed to be this, then I could accept it. And it was supposed to be an email, and it's turning into a book. So I'm working on that. And then someday I would like to work on a thing I call abuse culture, which is sort of taking the concepts that are in recovery agency and taking a look at the rest of society and interpersonal relationships and organizations, and just basically saying, here's how all of society and individuals use these techniques, and maybe we should to basically bolster abusers and help abusers out and enable them. So maybe we should stop helping the abusers. So those are kind of my three big things right now. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Fantastic. That's exciting.
Yeah, thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments they'd like to make at this point? Well, I guess we'll turn it back to you, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think, hold on a second. It's asking me to unmute. There we go. Yeah, I think I'm just in awe of this entire discussion. I was very silent today, which I'm usually not, because I just was taking it all in, and just so in awe of the book and what it means to everyone, and of Luna. This has just been an incredible discussion. So let's finish up with our final slides. We do move into a sort of mix and mingle after this, which allows us just to kind of talk. It's not recorded, so we can be a little more free in that. So anybody who'd like to stay for that, we always have a really good time there. So let's see. As we said at the top of the episode, we're going to be covering Genghis Khan for our book club book in May, and Bruce is going to give us a brief preview to get us all excited about reading that.
Okay, yeah, I'm leading the discussion on Genghis Khan. As I mentioned earlier, the book club is one of the means that I help trying to figure out how the world works, what my place is in it, and just kind of understanding how the world works in a post-Mormon understanding of the world. And so we've read things like Sapiens, Free Will, Body Keeps the Score, How to Be Perfect, as kind of understanding ourselves. We've seen other cultures, Braiding Sweetgrass, 1491, describing the Americas before Columbus came. The culture we grew up in was very Eurocentric and Abrahamic religion based on the view of its world. There's other parts of the world, and Genghis Khan and that part of Asia from his period was 1206 to 1294. It's a very interesting book. I read it several years ago, and that's why I suggested it for the book club. It's just kind of expanding our understanding of how the world is, beyond the Eurocentric Judeo-Christian world view that we have. And I always think, how lucky and miraculous it is. And it's lucky that I was born now, because I could have been born on the Mongol steppe when Genghis Khan's horde came through, and I may have had, a family. I may have been in my 20s and killed just because I was in their way. And so my life is much, much richer just because of the luck that I have, and I need to take advantage of that. So this book will give us kind of an understanding and a nice read on something that was going on in another part of the world that many of us grew up not knowing about.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a great preview. And I do love that about the book club so much also, is that we vote on categories of what we'd like to read, and they change year to year. And then within those categories, we make suggestions of books, and then we vote on those books. So I love it that we just love to learn, and we love to read and basically re-educate ourselves kind of on the other side of Mormonism. So I'm very excited to delve into this book. I think it'll be great. So very quickly, we just introduced a little bit of media on the radar that the book club might be interested in. We have the Good Media Club, where we kind of curate things that are series, movies, relevant to Mormonism, post-Mormonism. We just kind of put out there. It's on a Facebook page, so you can find that if you're interested. Our episodes and our book club meetings are in podcast format, so you can go to the Good Book Club podcast through any of your typical ways that you would access a podcast, and you can get the audio of that. And that's available pretty quickly after our episodes. Also on YouTube, the Good Book Club for Post-Mormons is what you want to search, because there's a lot of things on YouTube called the Good Book Club, mostly Christian. So search the Good Book Club for Post-Mormons, and all of our book club meetings and bonus events are posted there for all of us to access. So that's a good way to catch up. Also, you can check out the Mormonish podcast. That's something that Landon and I run together, and we interview a lot of you guys, because you guys have awesome stories on the other side of Mormonism, and we like to give everyone a platform to tell everybody, their thoughts and feelings, and we can all learn from that. So other ways to contact us: if you're not a member, but you just popped in for today, but you'd like to join us or find out more, we have a Facebook page. That's where we do most of our interaction. That's our logo right there. You can just find us on Facebook and ask to join. We're also on Instagram, where we can send links and things to meetings. And you can just send me an email if you're not on social media at thegoodbookclub@mail.com, and I will write you right back and tell you other ways to connect with us and send you links to things if you'd like to be involved. And I think our last slide, oh yes, sometimes if you email me and I email you back, it goes to spam. So for whatever reason, check your spam if you have reached out, because we always will get back to you, because we love to interact with all of you. And as we've said many times in all of our meetings, community is the most important. So that being said, let us end our recording now. Goodbye from the Good Book Club. Thank you